Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shanice and Nancy, sometimes known as Sharon and Nancy, which is my middle name. Yeah, all over the show. But it's good to have you back in another episode. Nancy, how are you doing? Today, we're not in the same physical space. I'm still in South
No,
Africa, and you are in
yeah,
Uganda. Miss you.
I'm in Uganda. It was so nice to be together. What a great week. The amazing sushi date. That was so much fun. Hanging out with the
Yes,
kids. Yeah, it was so nice. And to be in the same place again,
yeah,
that's always great. But here we are.
absolutely.
We are
And
dedicated and committed, so we soldier on.
we live up to our two metrics. Number one, show up. Number two, say a prayer.
And we've already won on that count.
And we've already won, yes. So,
Yeah.
speaking of kids, you said it was lovely to spend time with the kids. When Nancy was over, one of the things we spoke about was children and how sometimes we are in spaces and places where we interact with other parents' children. And it's very enlightening to see behavior and attitude and things like this. And so today we are talking about why successful parents sometimes raise ungrateful kids and how you can break this pattern. So imagine you have given your kids everything, the private holidays, the private schools, um, the toys, the clothes, everything you felt maybe sometimes you didn't always have the best of, and you've given them everything, and you still get the eye rolls, the grumbles, the complaints, the entitlement, right? Where are we going wrong when it comes to teaching our children this important lesson about gratitude? And you hear this a lot from successful parents. And how do we break this pattern? Nancy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the main issue is that many of us are raising kids who have everything but appreciate nothing. And I mean, if you look around, I think this is something, if you're paying attention, you probably notice quite a bit when
Yeah.
parents have certain means. There's often a tendency for kids to be able to get anything they want. And I mean, we're parents, we want to give our kids nice things. And many of us, especially if you come from a certain background, you didn't have all this stuff growing up, and you want your child to have a different experience than you did. But I think there's a
Yeah.
fine balance between wanting kids to have things and, giving them things to the point where it actually becomes a bad thing for them, because everything in life is like that, isn't it? Too much of even a good
Yes.
thing
Yes.
becomes
Yeah.
dangerous. Yeah, like even with drugs and food and things like that, it's all in the dosage, right?
Yes.
A
Yes.
little bit of poison or a little bit of disease, otherwise known as a vaccine, can be good for you. But in the wrong dose, yeah, same as any type of drug or any type of anything we consume, really. So I think the principle is the same. And I think what we're going to be talking about today is not about depriving your kids, because I think that's where the alternative goes. So people
Yes.
try to fight back against this narrative, and then they
Yeah.
say, then I'm not going to give them good things. I'm not going to let them watch TV. I'm not going to buy this. And I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that's the right thing. I think the
Right.
key is not for your kids not to have things, it's for your kids to learn to be grateful for what they do have and to learn to be stewards. I think that concept of stewardship, which is a biblical concept, is actually the solution to this issue. But before we get into that, I'm quite interested in how you feel like this has shown up. Like, what anecdotal evidence is there, or even research evidence that this is an issue? That when parents are successful and have means,
Yeah.
there is a correlation between
Yeah.
that and having children who are ungrateful.
Beautiful question. So I wanted to actually answer that in two ways. First, I want to sort of define ungrateful in the context of kids. And then let's get deeper into the question you've asked. So for me, what is ungrateful? Ungrateful actually, I need to define it in terms that bring through what we're actually talking about, like practically. It's understanding the what, but not the why. So, what do I mean by that? The what is the holiday showed up. The what is the meal got cooked. The what is the electricity got paid, internet is always available. That's the what. But the
Mm.
why and the how is not clear. Children don't understand, how did these things come to be? How do they get
Mm.
here? Who provides for
Mm.
them? What do they have to do? Because gratitude comes when you understand the how. Now, let me put this another way. When you start working for yourself, you become immensely grateful for the things you have because you know how much effort you have to put in to be able to afford that meal or that nice
Mm.
blouse and so on and so forth. So I think that once we begin to understand the root of this, we can now get into exactly what you've said, Nancy, which is we don't need to deprive, but we do need to put a little extra effort for children to understand where these things are coming from, how hard mommy
Mm.
has to work. What is a bank balance? What is a mortgage? Do you know there's some kids who grow up not knowing that a mortgage is a thing? They think that you just buy a house the same way you buy a pair of shoes. And it will
But
strike you as,
also,
yeah,
sorry, I just have to cut in before I forget to say this. I think you should also touch on the fact that, showing them where these things come from is not about telling them a long story about how many years you had to work in 1927, right?
right?
It's about showing them, right? So whether it's going to work with them or
Yes,
making them earn some money by doing chores or tasks so they can see how
yes,
hard it is, but
yes,
not by telling them these long stories, right? About how
yes.
hard you had it, because I'm not sure that translates.
You know what? That is absolutely true because I had my son do the dishes the other day, and he kept complaining about just how hard it was. He was like, "This is annoying, mom. This is awful. I can't watch my movies. I can't." I'm like, "Well, now you know how Kim feels because Kim is our house manager. Now she has to do this all the time. She doesn't get time to watch it. And it's not in a punitive way, it's just for them to walk a mile in those shoes and understand deeply. And again, there's that kinesthetic experience you want, right? Kinetic meaning like you're doing something with your hands because that's also memory, that's also triggering learning. We learn in so many ways, visually, auditory, but also doing something. So him doing the dishes was him learning, okay, this is what it takes for this house to remain clean, for me to be able to go into the open the drawer and get a clean plate. There is a process. And we often rob our children of these experiences. And I heard this put so beautifully, that we build our own self-esteem by sacrificing our children's self-esteem. And that for me it just blew my mind. Because essentially, what it means when we sacrifice our children's self esteem is that we're making ourselves feel better by doing certain things because we're already proficient in these areas, right? We're proficient now at providing, we're proficient at doing these things. And we take the burden away from the children to protect them, quote unquote. But actually, what we're protecting is our own self esteem, our own sense of, oh, I've done so much, my children don't have to do anything. It's not about that. You are robbing your children of the very same thing that allowed you to be successful because you went through hardship that built certain qualities and skills in you that allowed you to actually be successful. So, this idea of keeping our children away from any suffering, any pain, and then you realize, oh, hang on, because I went through those things, I am where I am. What's going to happen to my child who thinks that chicken is something that comes from the fridge and is not actually an animal that you have to go out and catch, right? But I don't know if that
Right.
answers your question. I feel like I went off tangent a little bit there. But
No,
does that answer your
yeah,
question? Okay.
not in the least, but that's fine because because
Not
what you
in the
said was
least.
was
Wow. Rough.
no, what you
Okay.
said was still valuable, but no, you did part answer it because yes, I was asking about how it shows up, and I think you've described that very well, and it's easy for us to recognize it. But I suppose why this matters, and how it actually applies in everyday life. I think for anyone who's watching this and maybe you don't have children yet, I think it's worth thinking about this stuff because the best time to prepare something for something is before it happens, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, my son. So for those of you who may not know, Sharon has two children, who are now. Is he 10 already?
It's
No,
crazy.
he's
It's going to
not.
be 10 in May,
He's
so
going to be
9
10
and
in May.
7. Yeah.
9 and 7, yes. And my little one is only 1 year and 3 months now. But I am thinking about the stuff already. And also, I always say I have three kids because Sharon's kids are my kids. So
Yep.
it's kind of it's all rolled in there. But I think why it's interesting to think about these things even before you have children is because it's never too early to start. So even with my 1 year old, I find myself having to deliberately instill the beginning of, the seeds of these lessons. For instance, my little boy has lots of toys because he has lots of aunties, and admittedly, a mother who probably buys more than she should, because every time she
Yeah.
goes into a shop, she's like, oh, that's cute. Um, but what I do, because I want to, again, plant the seeds of resource stewardship, is I put the toys in rotation. So I don't give them all to him at once. I put some away. He can have those for, let's say, 3 weeks or so. And then when I bring out the new ones, you should see his face light up. He's like, oh,
Wow.
wow, it's like they're new toys to him. And I think
Yeah.
about how, after those toys have been there for like 3 weeks, it's like, yeah, he kind of forgets all
Yes.
about it. And I think that's
Absolutely.
so interesting in our psychology. When something is so easily available, you don't
Mm.
value it as much.
No.
And
No, you don't.
and
No, you
and so I
don't.
think it's important to, like, as you were saying, to think about how we are intentionally training our children in this way. And I think the biblical foundation here is very important. The Bible says, train your child in the way that he should go, and he will not
And you
depart
will
from
not
it.
soon depart from it.
Yes. And that tells me two things. One, children have to be trained, right?
Yeah.
That's something we sometimes overlook. We cave into their demands, and actually they're training us, and we
Yes, that
forget
happens
that.
a lot. Yeah.
Yes, we forget
Yeah.
that we are supposed to train children. And it may sound strange, but there's a lot of overlap between training children and training dogs.
It's funny, but it's true. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
really love what you're saying about this particular section, because if I can look at my own examples, and I love that you shared something that's in your day to day, right, that you experience. I've always been, and here's the thing, we kind of think that parenting is going to come naturally, that these things are going to awaken in us once we have children and we will know right from wrong. We spend so much time and effort learning about other things, how to be good in our work, how to, even some people pick up a book every now and then on how to be in a relationship, right? Because we recognize the importance of it. But it is surprising to me that a lot of busy, successful parents understand some things intuitively, right? Through experience. When my child is hungry, this is how they cry. When they're irritated, this is how they cry. I've sat with a mother who their child is screaming and she's just going on with conversation and everyone's turning to her and saying, but your child is screaming. She's like, oh, I know that scream. That's the agitated scream. That's not the I'm hurt scream. So she'll be fine. And I'm like, wow. So we know so much about our children in terms of certain physical things and things we've learned. Where we are woefully underprepared is for how our child's brains and minds work and how our own brains and minds work. What I have found to be so true is that even with this thing of raising ungrateful kids, understanding yourself first, training and coaching yourself first is actually where it all starts, because our children mirror us in so many ways. You know what you've just said about those toys being in rotation? I am sitting back here flabbergasted because this is the person you are. Even in your day-to-day life, this is how you are with your things. You rotate your things. You don't spend unnecessarily. You are cautious with money. So it's interesting for me that it is showing up in your parenting. And that's the
Hmm.
part that we overlook so much, is that we have to
Hmm.
understand ourselves really well in order not to have our children mirror our weaknesses and our inadequacies. Now I want to bring this to myself, me. I'm a spendthrift. My sister knows this. I spend based on feeling and emotion. And you know what goes through my brain? Oh, I'll make more money. I promise you this is what happens in my brain, right?
No, I mean,
And
you know what I always remember is how, so my sister and I lived together for quite a while when we were younger. My sister would come home after a long day. She's been working all day and she stumbles into the door. I'm so hungry. I'm starving. And you're like, why didn't you buy something to eat? And she'll say, no, I just didn't have any money on me. I'm like, how? And then I ask, what are those? Are those new sunglasses?
it's true. I bought sunglasses instead of buying a meal. But I wanted
So
them and they were
yes,
cute.
you really go, used to go, I think used to go on emotion. There's a lot
Yes,
more balance now.
absolutely. I
I
have
think you
grown
have changed dramatically, which is
yes.
amazing.
And here's
And
the
I
thing.
suppose being a CEO will also do that to you.
Oh, funny enough, no.
Good
Funny
point, but
enough,
that's for
being
another day.
yes, funny enough, being a CEO is what took me to that other extreme. But being a parent is actually what changed a lot about me. I realized that if I was going to be the parent I wanted to be, I was going to have to educate myself so much. And that, to sound cheesy, but true, it begins with me. So I went on this entire journey of sort of self-discovery and self-education. And the one thing I wanted to just quickly to sum this up is I started to realize that because of my nature of sort of being able to just buy what I wanted based on emotion, I had to put certain guardrails. So my children and I have a philosophy that we all understand. We buy toys 4 times a year. The first is when school closes. The second is when we have our December holidays. That's Christmas. The third is when it's your birthday. And the fourth is based on really great performance or something that you've done that's extraordinary. So they already understand the parameters. They already understand there's a structure to this. And you can't, not everything you will earn. I also don't want them to internalize that everything has to be earned. Some things
Yeah.
are to be enjoyed and because you have the money to enjoy them. So I try to strike a balance between you've earned this and well, you haven't earned this, but I love you and it's coming out of grace and the goodness of God because there's so many things that God gives us that we don't earn. You
Oh,
know, some of us
everything.
should not even be sitting here. Like we are just here on grace.
Yeah.
If we were to go just on our performance and the things we've done in the past, we wouldn't have earned that. But the last, to sum this up, the last area I wanted to talk about is that I learned very early on that I'm an empathic person, but the side of that coin that isn't so pleasant is that I'm also a people pleaser. And parents who have a people pleaser problem, let me call it a people pleaser way of being in
Challenge.
the world. Challenge, let's put it that way, right? If you have a people pleaser challenge, there is also a good side to being a people pleaser, which means you're able to empathize deeply with people, you're able to resonate with them, and you're able to actually give people what they want. So it's not all bad news. It's just when it gets out of balance. Now, what happens when you're a people pleaser parent is you want to please your children all the time. You want them to think of you as nice mommy who cares about me. And I learned this lesson very early on. And this is why my children were ungrateful because children pick up on these things. They're like sharks in the water who have sniffed blood. And they are like, whoa, mommy is a people pleaser. Somehow they don't do the logic in their brain, but believe you me, they will throw things at you. I mean, my children are experts of the word mean. You're mean, mommy, because they know that that word is just gonna antagonize the people pleaser in me, and I'm going to give them whatever they want. So understanding yourself is so paramount because now that I know this, now that I'm full awareness of this, I embrace it. When they say I mean, that's my metric. I'm like, good. I'm now being a good parent because I'm drawing that boundary. And I try very hard to speak to them with kindness and love. Even when you're being, laying down discipline and things like this, you don't have to do it in a way that's nasty. You don't have to do it in a tone that's disrespectful to your children. You can do it with grace and love, but you can hold your boundary firmly. And through that, believe me, those things matter so much because the intention is never to hurt our children. The intention, like Nancy said, is to train our children, is to nurture our children and to show them the right path. So I've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm sure I'm going to make a lot more mistakes, and I will learn more as we go. But for me, fundamentally, you need to study yourself. You need to understand yourself. You need to work on yourself, because the more you work on yourself, the easier it gets to raise children who are grateful for everything they have and how hard you work. Does that resonate with you in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the knowing yourself and therefore knowing what kind of tendencies you will have as a parent is
Yeah.
so important. I think it's really good that you brought that up because it's a powerful point. And I can see that with me. And I think my thing was control because,
Oh,
as
wow.
you know, I have a spreadsheet for everything. I like to be in control of things. And
Yes,
from the
she
gate,
does.
this son was like, if you thought this was going to be like those little projects you do where you can run things and they all just work according to, no, this is not one of those. And I think, in many ways, I've just been learning to let go of um, some of that control and really, really appreciate that this child is his own person. I have custody for a period, but I am really, stewarding him for God. And my job is to train him in the way he should go. But I cannot, something as simple as you're going to breastfeed. That was my plan and this was how it's going to work. I like all natural. This boy just refused to breastfeed. And so there I was pumping for months on end, but even something as small as that, it shook me. It taught me that, you think you're in control and you're not. And I have the tendency to, if he's running around, I'm thinking all the ways he could hurt himself and all the things that could go wrong. And now I have to learn that, as you were saying, sometimes you just have to let him because he's going to do what he wants to do. And I think that's the biggest understanding ourselves plays a stewarding because I think the solution to raising grateful kids isn't giving them less. It's teaching them how to hold what they receive differently. So I think I like this concept of open hands. And that's how I think about it. When I'm thinking about how to raise
Yeah.
my son in a way that he receives gratefully, but also gives generously, I just think of how do I teach him to keep his hands open? Because
Oh, I love
there is a
that.
way to learn to receive, right? And I think when you understand, for instance, I think it's First Peter 4:10, which says, "Use whatever gift you have received to serve others." That's a mind shift because if you're teaching your child that, they learn that when they receive, they are a vessel, they're a conduit. What they receive is supposed to flow through them, right? So they'll be thinking, how do I share this? How do I multiply it? How do I do good with it? If I got a pencil set or a coloring set, can I draw a nice picture for mommy or daddy? Like that will become their mindset, right? They're
Beautiful.
thinking that, things are not just for me, but also Luke 12:48 says, from everyone given much, much will be demanded, to paraphrase, right? Much is given. Yeah, you will be, more will be expected of you. And I think that's a beautiful concept also to introduce children to, that because you have more responsibility. And there's actually research as well to back this up. And we always find this, don't we, that biblical concepts will always translate
Yeah.
into some research at Harvard or somewhere. But in the Journal of Positive Psychology, I have this written down somewhere. Yeah, in 2019, they said that children who manage resources show 35% higher gratitude. So if you're teaching your child, whether it's and managing resources doesn't need to be a big thing. It could be a bank account. Yes, it could be that you open a bank account for them and they learn how to save and that kind of thing. But it would also be simple, like responsibility for their toys, putting them away in the evenings, being careful with them, mending them when they get broken, not just throwing them away like they didn't matter. I think just teaching them how to steward their resources, keeping their rooms clean, keeping track of where their things are. I think it teaches them this idea that when you receive things, you receive with open hands, grateful for where this came from, what it took to get it, how it's going to get through you to help other people. But also, those hands stay open to give generously. And I think teaching children those two concepts, I feel, at least for me, is what helps me tackle that issue of, am I going to raise ungrateful kids? Because I have the ability to give them pretty much, most things. I would love to do that.
Yeah.
But does,
I love that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I love that. Yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking to myself, it's so true that most of us don't interrogate if we are grateful ourselves. Now, let me pause
ooh,
there and explain what I mean by this. If you're honest with yourself, the typical successful person, not even parent, moves from one accomplishment to another with no pause or break in between, and focuses most of their energy and time on what they don't have. These are us as humans. It's a human thing. I'm not indicting anyone. I'm just saying, look, I do it too. You get this thing and you're like, oh, but it's not this. And then there's this thing called normalization that sets in. You really wanted that car. You get it, you drive it for 6 months, and then it's normal. So you almost start to disrespect the car, and you don't really, you're not that enamored by it anymore. Now, here's the thing I want us to really take home, because I've experienced this. My son is 9, my daughter's 7. Boy, do they watch you. Boy, do they soak in every single thing you say and do, even the things you don't realize, even the energies you exude. They pick up on your energy and it becomes theirs, because they are literally your mirror at this point, when their brain, up to the age of about 12, and sometimes even past that. Now, if you have an attitude and an energy of gratefulness, I promise you, you don't even have to remember any of the tips we're giving you. It will flow through you naturally, that you will find these moments to teach your children gratitude. I remember when I started working on myself, and I'm like, I started realizing I have so much more than most people, but I don't really sit to enjoy the things I have. Like, when was the last time I sat down and had a cup of tea and said, thank you for this day, thank you for this beautiful house I live in, thank you for my business, even though it's challenging. All I was doing, typical CEO decision-making trees, I'm just making decisions. I'm just constantly saying, we didn't hit our targets last year, but we hit 70% of our targets. That's still massive. So we forget the 70%, we focus on the 30%, and guess what? It becomes who you are. When I then started to say, no, this is not good enough, I really have to be more grateful. And in different ways, right? I started researching, why am I not that happy? Why am I never able to be present in the moment? And these things inevitably lead you to gratitude. And one thing I started doing with my kids, which we do to date, is something called gratitude circle. Every morning on our drive to school, we say 3 things we are grateful for. Sometimes it's more than 3 things. And each person takes a turn and says, I'm grateful for this. Now, here's the thing. Children are amazing. When they're having a bad day, they will rebel. And they'll do, just to spite you, they'll be like, I'm grateful I don't have to walk to school. And they don't really mean it, or they don't really internalize it.
Or I'm grateful that this ride isn't too long, so I don't have to sit too long with mommy in the car.
Oh, you better believe it. They come up with all sorts of things, right, when they're not in the mood or when they're not happy. But I did it consistently, no matter what. And I remember one day I was having such a bad morning. And I was like, today, God, you'll forgive me? Ain't no gratitude in my heart. And my daughter pipes up from the back and says, Mommy, you forgot gratitude circle. And I was just like, just that moment of indictment. And then this is the thing about children. In the moment, it feels like we're wasting time. We're whistling in the wind. We are telling them things that they go in one ear and out the other. But I promise you, it is not like that. It is not like that. You will be astounded by how much they retain, how much then becomes practice. And that's why I hang on to this thing you said about training. Because how do you train a dog? It's through repetition and reward. And it's the same with children. Repeat, reward, repeat, reward. And that cycle then inevitably starts to teach them how to be grateful. And the thing is, it feels like hard work, everything we're saying right now. But if you understand the importance of this and you start, don't think about your children, right? Don't think about, oh, I have to now give lectures and sermons and all of that. Just start with yourself. Because when you start with yourself, it is inevitable that it will trickle down to the children. And that's my lived experience, is that when I changed myself, inevitably how I showed up, the things that I did, simple things, making sure you take your dishes to the scullery, making sure you wash your dishes, making sure you clean your room. All these things I started to do because I was grateful for the space we had. I was grateful for everything we had. So it's almost like no matter whether you are in a bad moment with your children or a good moment with your children, somehow you will find how to use that moment to be able to inculcate that lesson because it is who you are. So people always say, I'm going to forget the tips. I'm going to forget the ways. It's so much work. I have to read 1,000 books. But really, once you are doing the work, it just starts to trickle through. And you get benefit from it too. You start to enjoy your life more. You start to be more present. And everyone's happier, really, at the end of the day, and more grateful.
Yeah, no, that tracks. And I think you're absolutely right. Children are such a mirror. And I think this is why, as parents, it's quite difficult to watch your children have bad behavior because somehow you know some of that might be
Deep
a
down inside.
reflection, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying all of it is, but
No.
you know at the very least that you have a responsibility to manage that situation.
Yes.
And I think one of the things, yes, that is very powerful is, if you want to, as you've said, if you want to teach your children to have open hands, you have to ask, do you have open hands? Are
Open
you,
hands.
a grateful person?
Yes.
Are you filled with gratitude? And the other thing I was thinking as you spoke is someone might think, well, this doesn't apply to me because I don't have, the ability to give my
Yeah.
children everything. But I
Yeah.
think it's actually quite interesting that whether you have money or you don't, the principle remains the same. You can still teach, stewardship. It's not a matter of how much money there is or how much resource, because I do find that it is possible to still teach your children negative associations with things where you end up with the same result. They hoard, they keep, they're not
Yeah.
generous, because what you've instilled in them is there's never enough. There's never enough for
Yes.
anything, there's never enough for us, let alone for other people. And
Yes.
I think there is, especially a generation where things were generally hard. And I think many of our parents, wittingly or unwittingly, raised us with this idea of there isn't enough. So if you asked for
Yeah.
something, the answer was always no. First,
Yes.
do you think money grows on trees? You know,
Trees. Actually, it does, but that's a story for another day. It's paper.
because it's paper. Yes, and so I think the idea here is it's not the what, it's the
Yeah.
why, it's the intent behind how you steward how you teach your child to steward resources, whether those resources are many or
Yes.
few. Because I think
Yes.
either way you're passing on vital lessons about what it means to have things and what it
Yes.
means not to have things. And I think why this just shows up so strongly and it's more visible when it comes to successful people is because it's just obvious. It's more obvious. And success does, I think, give our children full hands, but
Yeah.
it's only wisdom that can teach them to keep those hands open so they can be
Yes.
generous with what they have and so they can be grateful for everything that they receive. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if we're just so we've kind of defined what we think gratitude is and how it shows up. We've talked about some of our own examples and what we've been through and how we've seen our children as well have those moments where we are taken aback by their selfishness. We're taken aback by their lack of an ability to perceive that so much is done for them and to be grateful. I think the moment that was stumped me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is when my son said, "Well, I didn't ask to be born." And valid point. So you want me to be grateful for all these things you're doing for me, but did I ask for them? Right? How would you go about answering that one? Because I'm sure there'll be parents watching this who are like, yep, I've heard that one before.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. Um, hmm, that really is. I think with children, I'm finding that the first thing is to ask what's behind the behavior, because I feel like, what happens is never as interesting as why it happened when it comes to children. And so I would probably ask, have I been putting this impression in their head that because I do things for them, they should be grateful? Have I been giving them the wrong reason for gratitude? So and I think it's linked to what you were saying before, in the sense that you don't want children to feel like love and doing things is based on how well they behave, or that if you're not grateful, it will be taken away. I feel that children should learn that we do things for them because that's who we are as beings. We serve others. Yeah. So my mother does things for me because her mantra is love God, serve people. So she's always going to serve people, whether it's me, my sister, guests who come to our home, the staff she has. That's who she is. And that's who I am, right? I serve people. So it's not linked to you know, how well you've done, how well behaved. So I just find that it's a very interesting question and a very difficult one.
But
But
you
where
haven't
do
answered
you
the
think?
question at all, though. Which
Way to
I
call
love
me
how you've
out.
eloquently gone around that bush.
I was
I
getting
thank
there.
you.
I was
But
getting there.
because at
But
the heart of,
but what was your question? Clarify your question.
okay,
What?
so let
How
me
would you
clarify.
respond to that? Yeah.
At the heart of that question is a
Hmm.
very simple hypothesis,
Yeah.
which is who chooses to have the children?
You.
Who chooses? We do, right? We choose to have these children. And that is, I think that is it's fair to say that is a correct assumption that yes, the child does not choose to be born necessarily, in as much as we know. Okay. So when the child is born and comes into this world, now the people who chose to have this child, and let's now get into why, maybe very, very, very briefly. To some people have children so that they can be approved of in the world. Oh, you've ticked all the milestones. You got married, you had children, etc. Some people have children so that they can feel a sense of fulfillment and purpose. We've seen this. Some people have children because they want to continue their lineage and it's expected. So now you've accomplished something, right? Your genealogy continues to exist. Most of these reasons, surface level, are very selfish reasons.
Selfish.
Selfish being about us, not about the child necessarily. Of course, there are some people who recognize that to have children is going to be a huge responsibility. We bring them into this world. They come through us, but they're not of us. They don't belong to us. They will chart their own paths. But that's a deeper reason. Now, when a child looks at you and says, well, you want me, in essence, to give you gratitude for something I never asked for. I didn't ask to be born. You had me for your own selfish reasons. Why does that track? Why should I be grateful for all these things? You're supposed to do them. You wanted to have me, right? So I think what I'm looking for is where does it benefit the child to be grateful, if that makes sense? Because in the
Yes.
child's understanding, that gratitude you are asking for benefits you. You want to thank you for all these things you're doing, or I must thank God or whoever, but I didn't ask for these things. So we have to answer the so what's in it for me question for the child. Again, I'm looking at this very simplistically, right? But if I were to answer the question, which is actually occurring to me right now, I'm no genius or anything, because I really literally was stumped when I asked you this question. And I'm thinking in real time now. I think to answer that question, I would be able to say to the child that gratitude actually is in your best interest. Gratitude gives you a better life, a better experience of life, and allows you to do more, because actually gratitude puts you in the frame of mind to receive more. I love what you said about receiving and being a vessel, right? So, in many ways, there's a big self serving reason for gratitude, which is it does put us, okay, let me get into some science a little bit here, right? Your brain is comprised of left and right brain, higher and lower functions. We all know that there's the survival brain, and we all know that there's a brain that thrives. There's a brain that's responsible for calm decisions, what we call our sage brain. Now, gratitude allows us to enter that state, right? Of having a sage brain that is able to see things, opportunities, and all of that. Whereas we know very well that our survival brain is all about freeze, flight, fawn, fight, right? It's about surviving. And it limits our ability to really draw the most from life, to be in a place of giving rather than just taking, taking, taking. We talked about this in a previous video where we said a lot of imposter syndrome is because we're just there to take as opposed to give. Now, gratitude is one of those things that puts you in that state where you are calm and you are grateful and you can see these other things. So I've gone into a total tangent there, but just bringing in some sort of scientific reasoning as to why it is actually good to practice gratitude. But the thing is, how do you break this down for a 5-year-old who's saying, well, I didn't ask to be born, mommy, and you want me to be grateful for all these things, right?
I
Is to
suppose
say,
I'm also wondering,
yeah.
even if you did break all that down for them, wouldn't it still teach them that, selfish reasons are the only reason to do anything? Because at the end of the day, the gratitude is still good for you. So it's about you. So the only reason to do it is because it's good for you.
That's a great point. I think there's a balance. I think we are selfish in nature and we have to admit that. And I do believe that submitting to God is actually what takes that selfish nature away from us. It's hard. We're here to survive, we're here to look after ourselves. If you look at kids in their formative years, everything is about them. And rightfully so, because their brains have not developed yet to actually have empathy. This is proven, right? We only start to look at empathy from what ages of like 4, 5 upwards. That's when it starts to actually track in our mind that other people exist. And that's through no fault of the child. It's simply biology that they need to look. And you've seen this phenomena where a child doesn't actually realize it is separate from its mother. It thinks its mother and it are the same person. So that's why they wonder why when they cry, the mother doesn't immediately come to their aid, right? Because they feel they're the same organism, which makes sense to me because you've been together in the womb. But let's not get into all of that. Your point is, are we not teaching them to just continue to do things for themselves? That's half of the equation for me. But I think it's an important half of the equation. I think just saying that you have to just be grateful because it's the right thing to do, because God calls us to serve, love Him and serve others, it's half of the story. And I think you need to tell the complete story for them to understand that in as much as this is great and it's good for others, it's also good for you. In the same way that forgiveness, we're now being taught, right, is not just about the other person, it's also about you. It completes the story and the picture, I think.
I hear what you're saying. And to now answer your question, this is what I would do.
Oh, 10 years later. Why, thank you. I'm kidding. Go on. I'm playing.
If my son did ask me that question, I would ask, so, okay, if he said, oh, I didn't ask to be bored, I would ask, so what did you ask for? Now, the reason I ask that is because I think more than answers, this is an opportunity to just have a conversation with your child about what they're thinking and why. I'm not so sure this is about telling them what to think. I think it's about exploring how they think and just giving them an opportunity to consider different viewpoints. So I think that's definitely what I would do. I would, because to me this has echoes of some of the questions that people in the Bible asked God. I think this is why Job said something like, "Does the pot, ask its maker, why he made him that way. And I think that echoes an interesting human element where any of us could ask, why are we here to begin with? I didn't ask to be born, I didn't ask to be here on this planet. So it's probably a gateway into some really interesting ways
Absolutely.
that the child thinks. I don't think I have an answer as to what I should say to make them see something a certain way. And I don't think I'll try to do that. I think I'll just try to have a conversation to understand how they're thinking about life, why they feel this pressure to be grateful, and why they're resisting that, why they don't want to be grateful. I think that to me is the interesting thing there. Why they don't want to be grateful. So I'd probably take that just as an opportunity to explore that. But I think it's a brilliant question to bring up,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it does have so many I think so many insights and so many touch points. And it's real. It's real. When we try to teach our children some of these things, we're going to get a lot of pushback from, environmental factors, from the world isn't set up to sort of teach children how to serve others
No,
or,
it's not.
how
It's not.
to consider
And,
others
and and
before
if it
themselves.
is, it's teaching them to serve others so that they can serve themselves. And I
Yeah.
think that's at the crux of what you're saying. What I love about the exploratory thing and what I've learned through my experience is that everything has to have balance. You cannot, well, I cannot, let me speak for myself. I've found that at times your kids are actually coming to you for answers. And what I do is I give them my thoughts at the time and I tell them this is what I think it might change because humans evolve. And then I give them my answer and ask them, what do you think? And I think that's the balance there because at some point, I've noticed that my children are worried if I don't have the answers, like, well, if you don't know, then. And now they start to feel unsafe. But I think giving a little bit, right? And
Mm,
then saying, but I welcome your thoughts. So I love what you've brought up about exploring with them
mm, mm.
as well. But I feel that they also need a bit of anchoring. But that again,
Absolutely.
remember, all children are different. That's also very paramount. So you might have the
Yes.
sort of child that absolutely does not want any. My son is like that. He doesn't know. He's going to figure it out by himself. My daughter, on the other hand, she kind of wants to know what you think, even though she's very independent minded herself. And I think that's such an interesting balance there that you've brought up. When it comes to certain schools of thought, the other day, my son came and asked me, what if God doesn't exist? I had to reckon with that question. Do you know what I mean? And at times we run to, oh, he absolutely does. How do you
Mm,
know? Because I've seen
mm.
him move in my life. How has he moved in your life? He's done this and this and this for me. What if I don't think he exists? Then that's fine. You must come to it in your own time. That is so hard for Christians to do. They almost feel like they're betraying God if they even leave room for their children to explore that this
I
might
don't
not
know
be
about
okay.
that though, because I mean, God Himself says, "Come, let us reason together," right? He wants you to use your brain.
Yeah,
This is not supposed to, and so I love that, and I think those hard questions, it's not necessarily about having answers, it's about having opportunities to get to know your child and for your child to learn how
absolutely.
to think and explore how to reason and how to argue. And maybe
Absolutely.
that's the point of those moments.
Yeah.
And, what you said about balance, I've been experiencing that in a very interesting way with a toddler because, yes, they're crazy. And I was trying to think, how do I strike this balance? Because sometimes things have to get done. Of course, I hate it if he's screaming. But I think one explanation I saw that I really liked, and this is just a practical point, is that, playtime, they're in charge. Everything else, you're in charge.
I
And I
love,
love that because when we're playing, I enter his world. He is the
yes,
boss. We do
yes,
whatever he wants. If he says
yeah,
we're going to put this on our heads, I'll do it. I'll crawl on the floor with him. He's the
absolutely.
boss. Everything
But
else,
but
bedtime,
make no
bath
mistake,
time,
once playtime is over, we're not negotiating bath time, we're not
yeah, it's going to
negotiating
happen.
screen time, we're not, and that's a very hard distinction to make, actually,
Yeah.
because we do want our children to be independent minded, we do want them to be strong, We do want them to be able to grow up to be adults who have boundaries. We need to do a whole episode on boundaries because African families and boundaries, hey, that's
I know this is your bugbear.
no, no, no. This is my, oh gosh. I'm sorry, but I've grown up with almost zero boundaries because of a lot of experiences I went through. And it's funny because our parents were amazing, with this. But then I went through some other experiences after that just decimated this idea of boundaries. And African parents find it very normal. Like, when was the last time an African parent knocked on a door of a child, right? To say, can I come in? Can you imagine? Can you even imagine? They're like, I pay rent. Boom. And it's such an interesting concept. We'll talk about that later. This is about how to raise grateful children. I wanted to sort of wrap it up with something that is a great recommendation. I love this book. I think you're the one who put me onto this book, Nance, right? The Whole Brain Child. And it's such a great book. And I think for me, the one thing I want as a takeaway, I'm going to read from it very quickly. It says, as children develop, their brains mirror their parents' brain. In other words, the parent's own growth and development, or lack of those, impacts the child's brain. As parents become more aware and emotionally healthy, this includes gratitude, by the way, that's why I'm reading it, their children reap the rewards and move towards that same health as well. Because I actually think I can classify gratitude as a form of emotional wellness. Because there are some people in this world who never get enough. They never have enough. And they're on a perpetual hamster wheel that leads to sadness, that leads to unfulfillment, because you cannot simply sit still and enjoy what you do have. So you will never arrive, let me tell you. You will always be at the bottom of that mountain. And it's when you die, you will die feeling, oh goodness, I wish I had actually spent more time with my kids, been grateful, worried less, and all of these things. They're very hard to do, very hard to do. But as the Bible says, seek and you shall find. I believe that if you really want your children to be happy and successful and to have great lives, that one of the cornerstones of that is gratitude to God, gratitude to others for the things that they have in their lives that honestly, by all stretch of the imagination, they don't even deserve to have. And that is our God. He is such a gracious God. He gives us more than we deserve. And I think sitting in that daily is such an important practice. So that's my one thing. What's yours, Nance?
It's very similar. I think for me, the verse that I hold on to as a parent is just train a child in the way that he should go, because there's a promise attached to it that he will not depart from it, even if he strays. But I also find there's amazing synergy with what you're saying, because to train a child in the way he should go, you've got to know what is the way he should go, right? You can't do that if you, as a parent, do not know what is the way he should go. And that's where you growing in yourself, you sort of healing and working on yourself also translates to you being able to show your child the way he should go. So I find myself constantly asking, when I see behavior in my child, is this the way he should go? Is this the way he should go? Is this the way he should go? And then I try to, correct, but it always begins with me learning. It begins with me learning, and then I can pass it on. And I find ways to pass it on. So I think there's a lot of synergy in both our things. That's my one thing. Train a child in the way he should go. And when it comes to dealing with the possibility of spoiling children, I think the way they should go is open hands. Teach them to receive gratefully and to give generously. And that's what I aspire to do. God help me. And
Absolutely.
yeah, but
Yeah, and for God's
also
sake,
on the
take your
books.
kids to work. Let them see you sweat. Let them know how money comes in. Sit with them. I do finances with my kids. I'm like, let's budget. What are we spending on this week? They don't get half of what I'm saying, but I'm like, it's the principle, right? And it's starting that trend where
Yes,
you can talk
planting
about
those.
finances, where you can talk about investing, right? I bought my 9-year-old a book on investment. I don't know where it is. I don't even know if he's reading it. But
The seed is
but
the
yeah,
seed has been
it's
planted.
about training, and then he will soon not depart from that. I
Yeah.
love that. That's brilliant.
And another
Yeah.
another book I could bring up that I have found really helpful, because the other thing is raising children between two cultures. I mean, a lot of the time we are in the UK, which is a
Yeah.
very different environment from
Yeah.
Uganda. and you're also
Yeah.
sort of between Uganda and South Africa. And I
Yeah.
find that cultures are very different, right? So, like in the UK, there's not as much community. So it's a very different experience
Mm.
for the child.
Yeah.
But a
Yeah.
book I found very interesting is called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And it really talks
I think I
about
have that on my
exactly what it,
bookshelf somewhere.
oh,
Yeah.
do you?
It's
Oh,
a great
that's
book.
interesting.
Great book.
It is a great book.
Yeah.
And I think the point of it is really what you've been talking about when you say take your kids to work, it's in the life, it's in the everyday. We used to do
Yeah.
that. Children used to
Yeah.
work with their parents,
Yeah.
whether the
That's
parents were
true.
blacksmiths or bakers
Yes.
or
Yeah.
farmers. That's
Yeah.
how children learned and picked up skills. And we don't really do that anymore.
Absolutely.
And that's why
Yeah.
it's so important to involve children. So we're not indulging them because now they're used to, because I was thinking about this. Look, my son has all our attention. He has, almost all the time. He has, grandparents fawning over him, aunties. I mean, you can't blame him if at the end of that he thinks what he wants is always the most important thing, right? And
Yes.
things
You
need to
have
happen
made it the most
according to.
important thing. Yeah.
Yes. And
100%.
so I've had to deliberately, sort of fight that natural inclination and sometimes say, no, actually, we are going to have a conversation as adults. You will have to take a back seat for now because he has to learn that he's not the center of
Yes.
the universe. Or
Yes.
mommy needs to work, so you can sit here and work with me, or, watch me, or come with me to the grocery shopping or the this, but not stop my entire
Yeah.
world for him
Yeah.
because it's important for
Yeah.
him to be involved
Yes. And for
in the
goodness
day to
sakes,
day.
let's allow our children the luxury of failure without rescuing them, without telling them it's okay, it's going to be okay, who knows? Let them figure out that it's going to be okay by themselves because
By
you don't
experience.
want to build, yeah, you don't want to build your own self-esteem off the back of your child's self-esteem. Allow them to build their self-esteem, right? So yeah, but that's the time we have for today. Obviously, this is such a great topic, and we're not experts. We're simply sharing because we're called to share. We've learned through so many experiences, been burned, and kind of come out the other end. And we're looking forward to learning from you in the comments because we do learn so much from your comments and when
So
you share.
much.
So
Yeah.
please, yeah. So that's another episode of 40 After 40. 40 lessons we've learned after turning 40. This is lesson number what? Number 4? I think at 5. Who's counting? We are going to put all of this information in an ebook that we would love to share with you at some point that's got all the points because there's so much more that we've learned that we can't just put in a 1-hour video. If you're interested in that ebook, in the comments section, we'll drop a link and also in the title section where you can just click through to a landing page, give us your email address, and we'll gladly send you that ebook when it's ready. For now, from Nancy and myself, thank you so much for your time. We absolutely are rooting for your deepest dreams to be realized and your success as a parent. Bye for now.
Bye for now.